Welcome back. Today we're going to do a quick one on the EarAcoustic STA-K. So for those of you who've been following along with EarAcoustic, they have a lot of models. They have a lot of STA models. This one happens to be STA-K, which I believe refers to KeepHiFi, which is where you can find this one, which is also who actually sent this one to me. I have a feeling it's an exclusive model to them and maybe it was designed for them. But anyway, they call it STA-K, but it's actually, the configuration is similar to the normal STA Pro Max or STA, and there's two dynamic drivers. So there's a 10 millimeter right there. There is a 6 millimeter right there. This is the kind of the resin back, and the faceplate is kind of blingy like the other STAs. So I don't think physically it is all that different from the normal STA. The tuning is actually different. The packaging is different. It's kind of a lower profile box. The cable is also, I think it actually is different. I thought that the original STA cable was a little bit thicker. It looks very similar, but I thought it was a slightly thicker 2-core, but I could be 100% wrong on that, and it could be the same cable. But anyway, this is the STA-K, and as I said, the packaging is a little bit different. The normal EarAcoustics packaging is actually, I think it's like 2 or 3 times the height. It's actually a tall cube, and this is more of a low profile version, which is actually a little bit easier to deal with. So we'll kind of start with the graph. And again, the graph isn't radically different than STA Pro Max. If you just glance at it at first, if you just kind of quickly look at it, it looks very similar. It still has the huge base shelf. It still rises pretty much to the Harman target. What was different on Pro Max was this carried out a little bit further at a higher level. There was more treble and upper treble presence on Pro Max, and that gave it more of a V shape. That was a lot of bass and enough treble to kind of balance, and that was a fine set for that style. This is actually a more relaxed version of treble, so there's still lots of bass. You're going to push the vocals a little bit forward like they did on Pro Max as well, but then it relaxes the upper, and all of that really shifts kind of the tonality and where the emphasis is down into the bass. So I would call this more of a bass head style set as opposed to Pro Max, which was more of a V shape because it had a pretty big presence out here, and that really gave you the lots of bass, lots of treble style V shape. This is more of a tilting from lots of bass down here into the relaxed treble. So again, it's still a same dual dynamic drivers. It's a 10 millimeter beryllium plated diaphragm on the bigger guy, and a 6 millimeter PET on the smaller one. And this one goes for about $49 on KeepHiFi. So what is it really? As I said, it's a flavor of STA where it has the same bass shelf, but lowered upper treble. Basically sounds heavier, bassier, thicker, close to a bass head tilt, but the vocals are brought a bit forward. And I actually kind of brought it against Legion, Flip Ears Legion. So Legion and Aegis both have this really heavy bass shelf, and the Legion and Aegis kind of handle the treble a little bit differently. It's a little bit more V-shaped with Legion. Aegis is maybe a little bit closer to STA-K, and it's kind of a relaxed upper treble version, and you can end up with a heavier, bassier, thicker version, and that's what I would call STA-K. So whether you're talking about Legion or STA Pro Max, I think both of those would have more of a presence out here. The kind of the Aegis or STA-K version is this more relaxed version, which is kind of right there. But yeah, it's very close to a bass head tilt, but the vocals are brought a little bit forward. And again, this is a tuning, very much a preference, as I would say the same thing about Legion. And you need to know what you're getting into before you're buying it. It's a very heavy low end. You'll need to turn it up enough to get the mids to come forward. Otherwise, it's going to be too much bass over the mids. And again, the other STA flavors had more upper treble, sounded a little bit sharper, cleaner. STA-K is just more for bass fans. And again, you can wave your hands over the graph and say it doesn't sound as heavy as it is, but this one, the way they kind of kept the same bass shelf and relaxed the upper treble, this one does indeed sound just as heavy as it graphs. And for those of you who are really concerned about clarity in the mids, this is probably not a bass shelf that you would be interested in. This is really for people who want this really heavy style bass shelf and kind of a mid bass king bass shelf, which is kind of what you're seeing there. So do keep in mind, I like this tuning. I think it's actually kind of fun, and it's more of a mood thing. Sometimes you're just in a mood to hear this really heavy, kind of heavy hitting bass. It's a really thick, deep sound. That's kind of fun on occasion. But again, that's kind of my preference. You may not really be into that, and do be aware that what you're kind of getting into with a set like this. Again, the bass, just a lot of mid bass, really tuned for people who enjoy the heavy, thick bass style. This tuning is more about the bass level than preserving any balance or clarity to the mids. Very fun, but also very thick. And again, on the mids, you just can't wave your hand over the mids and say, oh, the mids are perfect and they sound beautiful. No, they are going to be heavily influenced by the bass shelf, and there's just a ton of bass. But the second driver does create some separation. But as I said, you can't ignore the graph. This is a really heavy lower mid. The upper mid is brought slightly forward, slightly boosted to give you the V-shaped balance. But for me, this is really a boom mood set, right? It's a really fun set for EDM. It's a really fun set for dance and pop and other bass heavy genres. Be really careful with this tuning like this if you're really into mids. Again, I said you can't really ignore the graph. The mids are going to sound thick or recessed or both, depending on what your music library and how it hits and lands on this kind of tuning. The treble, again, most noticeable is the relaxed upper treble. If you're looking at, if you have STA Pro or Pro Max and you're kind of looking at what the difference is, they really relax the upper treble and the treble region, and it's very noticeable. And much like Legion, it's just nicely done V-shape, and it can be enjoyed at high volumes. Again, second driver gives you a little bit of separation, so it sounds a little bit cleaner than you assume, which goes for all the STA sets. And I said the same thing about Pro Max. It's having a second driver, having a V-shaped set that kind of slightly separated on two different drivers. It's not as muddy as you think it is with this kind of heavy bass shelf. I would say the same thing exact Legion. Legion does the same exact thing, right? 3 drivers. Aegis does 2 drivers. This does it in 2 drivers. Just having 2 different drivers doing this tends to work out a little better than having one single huge dynamic driver trying to do a tuning like this. That can sort of work out, but it doesn't. It just sounds way too muddy and not clear because you're not going to get the separation out there. But again, on all the STAs, you're sort of seeing kind of the same advantages of having a second driver to do that. And the stage, again, I'll say it actually stages surprisingly quite good. The upper treble is relaxed but not lost. It does project and create a bigger stage, which is necessary for this amount of bass. And again, many heavy bass sets, bass headsets or bass sets really have failed at creating stage with this style of bass shelf. So I was kind of happy to hear a proper V with stage, but it does need lots of volume. And again, part of it is there's 2 drivers. Part of it is there actually is some kind of treble extension out there to make the stage sound bigger. Part of it is where the bass is located. It's kind of a little offset from out of the middle of your head. So the vocals are raised a little bit. You do get nice width, and the bass is sort of not in the center of your head. So again, staging wise and how this kind of images in your head, that all kind of worked out better than I thought it was going to. And lots of sets have certainly failed at trying to pull off a bass shelf like that with imaging and staging that sounded anything other than kind of closed up and dense in your head. And this one kind of got that bit right. So that is what I got on the EarAcoustic STA-K. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.